the captain spot. I'm your host, Justin Freeman. 6 foot 1 inches, 275 pounds of fantasy knowledge. It's week 11, Sunday night. Got some fun little AFC West divisional matchup between the Chiefs and Raiders. This game will be in Vegas. Talking about a pretty high scoring game here. 56.5 point total. Chiefs favored on the road by 7.5. Looks like both teams will be relatively healthy. There's a couple injury news and notes for us to consider here this week. Before we get into that, quick reminder, like, rate, review, subscribe to the show here on YouTube, on your podcast platform, wherever you're getting it. Make sure you're going and checking out the Monday night show available over on Mayo Media Network. Subscribe over there. But why don't we talk a little bit more about what looks like a really interesting slate here between Raiders and Chiefs. A couple high-priced options that we're going to make sure we want to take advantage of on both sides of this football. So let's think about 7.5 point spread. What does that mean in terms of Vegas implications? So more than likely, Chiefs are going to dominate this game sort of whistle to whistle. That's the more likely thing to happen if we're predicting sort of a one-sided game script. Obviously, we're talking about Showdown. We want to be thinking about a variety of game scripts. But the most likely thing that we want to be focusing on is a scenario where the Chiefs get ahead and they sort of want to just pound that lead into the ground. Chiefs might not be a team that would just sort of heavily lean on the ground game in that sort of situation. They're a team that knows their best chance of sustaining a lead is to continue to let Patrick Mahomes be Patrick Mahomes, so we can get a little bit of a unique situation. There's a couple cheap running backs on both these teams we'll talk about. Before we do, let's talk about the injuries. Where on the Vegas side of the football, there's a couple people to notice, and they're both at the running back position. First of which is Jalen Richard, who is listed as questionable right now, but has not practiced all week long. So I would consider him to be on the doubtful side. And if he misses this game, and we'll know a little bit more 90 minutes before lock, our daily reminder to make sure we are checking inactives right before lock and make sure we have a good grasp on who's in and who's out. But if Jalen Richard doesn't play, the Raiders are down to just 2 running backs, and that's going to be Devontae Booker and, of course, Josh Jacobs, because Theo Riddick, another Raiders running back, is on the COVID IR list as of right now. So I'm expecting the Raiders to go in with 2 running backs. Of course, they have Alec Ingold, the fullback, as well. Perhaps he gets a little bit of passing volume, but the fact that Jalen Richard, the guy who is sort of the pass-down specialist in this particular backfield, is out, really makes both of the other running backs, Booker and Jacobs, a bit more attractive in this game. Now, we don't know for sure Richard is out, so let's make sure we check on that throughout the course of the afternoon. But if he is, we're talking slight boost to Booker and to Josh Jacobs. Now, on the other side of the football, Sammy Watkins will be out this week. We will not be seeing Sammy Watkins, so we'll get another week of Tyreek Hill, obviously being the number one as always, but also Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson sliding into more prominent roles. Now, those roles have started to crystallize and form over the last several weeks, so we know what we're getting with those 2 guys. The snaps are mostly going to Demarcus Robinson. It's become a bit of a full-time player. 81% of the snaps last week for Demarcus Robinson compared to 68% for Mecole Hardman. Mecole Hardman has been 68% in the last 2 weeks for this team. And so we've got now a 4-week sample size without Sammy Watkins. And it's been more Demarcus Robinson than Mecole Hardman. As we're talking about number of routes run, Robinson has really just completely outperformed Hardman in that particular category. And routes run is going to be probably the leading indicator of targets. Targets the leading indicator of fantasy points. So we're trying to predict how the targets will shake out between Hardman and Robinson. That's going to be an important thing. It's probably going to be pretty close, and we'll notice today that the pricing may incentivize us to go over one over the other. So let's talk about the pricing. We're starting at the quarterback position where Patrick Mahomes, 13-4. Mahomes, you could price him almost at whatever you want to, and we just got to try to find a way to get him in. It probably limits us from being able to captain Mahomes as much as he probably deserves to be. But overall, Mahomes has to be a key piece of what we're doing in the flex for sure. And, obviously quarterback captains can be difficult to pull off effectively. So Mahomes' price tag will discourage us from that, especially when he's got 2 feature weapons there in the passing game that probably make more sense as the actual captain ceiling type choice. Derek Carr 9,800. We just have to figure out whether we think Derek Carr can, maintain a relevant offense here in this game. And I think he can. I think this game could continue to be a pretty close game throughout. Like, I hope it doesn't get into desperation mode. I hope we get like some traditional game script going for the at least 3 quarters worth between these two teams. And if so, Derek Carr, I think, is a guy who can get you there and has an interesting complement of weapons. We'll talk about those here in just a minute. But let's talk about the running backs first, where Josh Jacobs is sort of the featured player here at the running back position, $9,600. The Raiders want him to be a key core feature of what they're doing. And then obviously we have Jalen Richard at $600 if he plays. Now, we're not interested necessarily in playing Richard as anything more than sort of, one-offs in tournaments and that sort of thing. But if he misses, let's think about where those targets are likely to go. We got a player like Devontae Booker, who has been more and more involved in the team's game plan over the last several weeks and has really picked up mop-up duty here recently. He's got 38% of the team's rush attempts last week, 31% the week before that. And that's pretty sustainable usage there for a backup running back. And if we think that Booker could be used the way Richard has been used as well, then perhaps that elevates Booker's game and elevates his profile and allows him to maybe be on the field closer to 40 or 45% of the snaps if Jacobs wants to sort of max out around 55 or 60% of the team's snaps. So that could be really good news for Devontae Booker. So that's going to be somebody we're really interested in this week. On the other side of the football, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, $8,200. That's honestly a high price point for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, you're banking on the fact that this being a bit of a runaway game here for the Chiefs. Could he justify that price point? Could he get more touches? Guess what? The Chiefs are favored by a touchdown every week. So I don't think the spread indicates that we should be more interested in Edwards-Helaire this week than we would be in other weeks. Now, Le'Veon Bell at $1,400 may be a different story because you think about what Le'Veon Bell would have to do to pay off that salary, and it's not very much. It's a lot different than Clyde Edwards-Helaire at $8,200, because let's look at how this has been split up since Le'Veon Bell has showed up. The snaps have been just incrementally in favor of Clyde Edwards-Helaire since Le'Veon Bell became a Chief. 33%, 26%, 31% of the team's snaps have gone to Le'Veon Bell. Compare that to 53, 50, and 40% for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Obviously, there's an advantage there for Clyde, but not huge when we start looking at total opportunity. It's just not been as massive, especially on the ground, where Clyde Edwards-Helaire 36, 30, and 42% of the team's rush attempts compared to 27, 30, and 33% of the team's rush attempts for Le'Veon Bell. So we're talking Clyde Edwards-Helaire's getting 2 or 3 more touches on the ground per game in addition to Le'Veon Bell. Now, Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been more involved in the passing game, which is a little bit surprising because I thought that when the team acquired Le'Veon Bell, it might have been for the purpose of letting him serve as kind of a complimentary Swiss Army knife type player. And that just hasn't really been the case for Bell, not as involved in the pass game. So there's a hard cap ceiling there for Le'Veon Bell, and Edwards-Helaire could blow up, but I think Clyde is certainly a player you could avoid. Now, the tournament strategy obviously comes into fact anytime we think that other people might come to that same conclusion, then he all of a sudden becomes a bit more valuable. Let's talk about the pass-catching options. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce are going to sort of be featured items here on Kansas City. I think you've got to play at least one of those guys. You could try to fit both of them. It may be very difficult to do with those two guys plus Patrick Mahomes, because you're going to need to pair Mahomes with either of those guys, and certainly with both of them. So could you pair them all together, and now you've got well over $30K of your cap tied up, to those handful of guys? Then you really got a lot of digging to do to fix the rest of your roster. I don't need to spend too much time talking about Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. There's nothing that scares you off matchup-wise for both these guys. Tyreek Hill has been relatively involved on the ground game, so just keep in mind, don't be surprised if you got 2 or 3% of targets, 2 or 3% of the team's rush attempts going through Tyreek Hill. Wouldn't be not 2 or 3%, 2 or 3 actual rush attempts going through Tyreek Hill. That's a possibility, and when that happens, that can leave Patrick Mahomes without the production there not necessarily a big problem for Patrick Mahomes, but Tyreek Hill averaging 20% of the team's targets, but we've seen a couple spike weeks from him. 2 out of the last 3 weeks, he's actually topped 40% of the team's targets, and that's huge. And that kind of limits opportunities to a certain extent for Travis Kelce. Kelsey's had some up and down usage games, but back-to-back games over 25% here in his last 2. Matter of fact, 4 out of his last 5 games have been over 25%, which puts him obviously in an elite category, which is where he belongs. I think Kelce is the guy you feel more confident about getting that floor from. So, feel good about Kelce as a play this week. Now, figuring out Robinson versus Hardman is a real difficult thing to do because I think we could easily project Demarcus Robinson for more snaps in this game, but we don't get fantasy points for snaps. We get fantasy points for receptions, and that stems from targets. So could Mecole Hardman out-target Demarcus Robinson in this game? I kind of think it's likely. I think the team wants to use Mecole Hardman with designed plays. Like you can see they draw plays up for that guy. Whereas Demarcus Robinson just needs to be the second read and have that pay off. And he's good at that, and that can be a way in which he excels. But really, honestly, both of these guys are completely viable. I would lean Hardman, especially given the fact that there's an $800 price differential in favor of Hardman. As we look at some of the other options for the Chiefs, Byron Pringle, a guy who has been playing more since Sammy Watkins has been out, 38%, 61%, 56%, 31% of the team snaps. So don't forget about Byron Pringle. So we're looking for guys who can just sort of pay off on a 3-target game. Pringle might be your guy there. Nick Keiser, Deion Yoder, we can't use those guys. As we look at the Raiders side of the football, Darren Waller, your most expensive pass catcher, and deservedly so, $7,000 for a guy who's just been seeing tremendously high volume, 26% of the team's targets on the year. That's a fantastic number for a tight end. He's $3,600 cheaper than Travis Kelce. Obviously, he plays in a inferior offense compared to the Chiefs. Insufficient, inferior. Darren Waller, $7,000. I think you can certainly count on him getting 8 targets or better tonight. I think that's a good way to get guaranteed targets into your team. $7,000. You just got to probably choose between he and Josh Jacobs for the most part. Like I'm doubting you're able to fit all the Chiefs and get the Waller and Jacobs in there. That's going to be kind of expensive. So if you're playing game script wars, like you could certainly justify playing Waller and then maybe come down from Jacobs to Booker might be a good opportunity for you there on the Vegas side. Aguilar, a guy who I think is a little bit overpriced here on this slate at $6,200. Saw 18% of the team's targets last week, but a couple, down games before that, 9% and 13% of the team's targets. I think Henry Ruggs is starting to emerge as the more featured guy in this offense between he and Aguilar. They're certainly the top 2 receivers, but I prefer Ruggs straight up at $5,000. And so there's two opportunities so far in this game. Ruggs at $5,000 compared to Aguilar at $6,200. And Mecole Hardman at $3,600 compared to Robinson at $4,400. Both of those situations, I like the cheaper guy straight up. And so there's some tremendous opportunity for us to leave salary on the table. Hunter Renfrow at $4,200. This is obviously a play you need if you're looking for just sort of guaranteed targets and low ceiling type players. Hunter Renfrow, Brian Edwards $1,200, and Zay Jones at $1,000. Really just tournament dart throws. Same for Jason Witten at $800. Not getting enough volume from any of those guys. Brian Edwards did play 28% of the team's snaps last week, which is up, and so that could continue to grow. So maybe worth a little bit more consideration there for Brian Edwards. Could he eat into Hunter Renfrow's job? That would be a big question, but we're probably still a week or 2 away from that particular outcome paying off. Let's take a look at the captain assignments this week, where it is Josh Jacobs, who's got a pretty good matchup here on paper. You can run against this Chiefs defense. That's not a problem. And if we figure that Jacobs is going to be a beneficiary of the Jalen Richard being out, he becomes really interesting as a captain choice. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is going to be right there, too, with just sort of his raw upside. He's starting to capitalize on a few more rushing touchdowns, which is nice for his captain equity. And then Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller sort of round out those top options there at the captain spot. Let's look at the flex appearances where it's clearly Patrick Mahomes. Just find a way to get him in there and don't look backward. Josh Jacobs after that, Derek Carr, then Le'Veon Bell. So there's our first cheap guy, Le'Veon Bell. I believe that we can project about 30 to 35% of the team's rush attempts going through Le'Veon Bell, and that might be good enough to pay off at his salary at $1,400. Followed by Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. So Hill and Kelce still right there, close together. And then Darren Waller and Demarcus Robinson right there as well. So a lot of opportunities for us to get creative on this slate, and I think that's what it's going to be. Like, I think this is less of a slate about football analysis and more of a slate about outgaming your opponent. Like, you got to think about, how's everybody going to want to build their lineups? They're going to want to build around Patrick Mahomes in this game. And so I think that could mean Josh Jacobs comes in a little under-owned. Like, you're not going to want to, pound in the running back from the team that's projected to lose. Like, nobody wants to do that. But yeah, what if you do? What if you thought about a 4-2 onslaught in favor of the Raiders? Could that pay off in this game? What if you faded Patrick Mahomes altogether? Is there any way that could pay off? I tend to think that's a bit too far-fetched. So you want to sort of stretch the limits of your imagination a little bit and then rein them back in. Like, your first question anytime you're seeing chalk is like, well, how can I fade that chalk? Is there a way that chalk busts? Is that chalk going to bust more than I need it to in order for me to pay off exponentially? And if so, then we're going to fade that chalk. But a situation like fading Patrick Mahomes, maybe that's a bit too unrealistic. And but I mean, there are situations where that happens. What if the game was really high scoring and all of the weapons were going off and you needed to just have them all instead of the quarterback? Could be a pricing constraint that happens that makes that particular lineup pop. So overall, I mean, I could just give you the tools and give you the analysis. Where I think your best chance of winning these things is to look back at snap data, look back at routes run data, look back at where the targets go. Try your best to understand like what's the most likely thing to happen, and then let's start making one-off and two-off decisions from there. Let's start fading key pieces, thinking about unique game scripts, because I can tell you what won't happen is the most likely thing. Like, if you tell me most likely versus the field, give me the field every time. So you just got to figure out whether the lineup you're playing fits the contest type that you're in and that sort of thing. So overall, that's going to do it. You got your word of wisdom. You got your cautionary tale for contest selection and that sort of thing. But overall, that'll do it for us this week. Follow me on Twitter at JustinFreeman18. We'll be back at you Monday for the Monday Night Show over on the Mayo Media Network. We'll see you soon.